Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on a RevOps review. I have today with me Sam Levan from Madkudu, where he's the CEO and co-founder, and we're here to talk about product-led growth and also sales-led growth, and then both of them together and the trends around that we're seeing in the industry. Before I jump in, Sam, it's really nice to have you. Can you just do a quick intro of you and your background and what Madkudu does?
Yeah, with pleasure. Maybe first, the accent is from France, but I've been in the US for the past 15 years. So I'm a co-founder of Madkudu. We are a sales intelligence platform, and we help hundreds of B2B software companies find more pipeline by translating all kind of data into actions for sales. So we've helped a lot of companies transition towards a PLS model, PLG model, or the other way around, where they had a PLG model and moving to a more sales-led model. I live in the Bay Area, and I have 4 kids plus one dog who is giving as much work as 2 kids, I would say.
The dog. All of what you're saying about your background in terms of product-led growth matches and aligns to how we think about the world at New, where I'm also co-founder. And we think of it from more of a pricing and billing perspective, whereas you're thinking about it more as a go-to-market motion perspective. And so every time we've talked, it's been really fun to just put our minds together and share what we're seeing. I don't have 4 kids and a dog, but there's the dog park near me, and I go and I'm like the aunt to the local dog park, so I don't have as much hassle as you. So let's just jump into sort of the current state. So right now in the economy, everybody's kind of tightened budgets, and this is where I think PLG, product-led growth motions, think commerce motions off your website tend to suffer a bit because they're really opt-in. And oftentimes they're tied to potentially usage-based pricing or consumption-based pricing. So there's so much flexibility and variability and potential churn risk. So I'm curious from your perspective, Sam, what's the current state of product-led growth motions, PLG? And is it, in effect dying? Are we seeing less of it? How do you think it's going right now for companies that are focused on a product-led growth motion and not the sales-led motion?
Yeah. And I think we often go through those inbound is dead, product-led is dead, outbound is dead. So I think some people are wondering if product-led growth is dead. And in a way, I think there are a lot of headwind on the product-led growth motions. I can tell you that 1 or 2 years ago, at every single board meeting, your investor, your board members would come and say, do we have a product-led growth motion? What are we doing about it? Have you seen the example of Stag, Atlassian? The efficiency, cost of acquisition seems like extremely good. Why don't we have one? The buyers now wants to go digital. They want to buy without talking to sales, right? We heard all of that. And it was a very top-down adoption of PLG. That has completely switched in board meetings for the companies that we work with, and even my board meeting. It's almost the other way around. And the change that has happened very drastically is that CFOs now are running organizations in some way. And when CFOs look at the organization, I think what they realized is, one, a bit of valley of despair, where a lot of people got hyped, and then now when it doesn't work as fast, a lot of companies got burned by trying a PLG motion, not seeing success right away. And the gap between expectations and reality has been big. But the other one is, I think few companies or few board teams realized the investment that it takes to get a PLG motion to work. I would say one of the fastest motion is often outbound in some ways. Very expensive. It doesn't work very well at all now, but you can get started within a week or so. Inbound can take 6 months. PLG is often an initiative that's going to take a year. So are you ready to invest? Like the partner-led motion is also something that takes a long time. So do we have alignment with a CFO on that one?
It's really interesting to see how companies tackle sales motions, because you can start out being product-led growth first and then add in a sales-led motion. You can start out being sales-led and then add in a product-led growth motion. And I think that's what you're alluding to, is those people didn't realize maybe how challenging it is. And then partner motions, usually you don't see that until companies are really large, because that is a lot of coordination to get that motion going as well. And it's interesting because I look at it from a venture capital standpoint, and what we would see is companies that started out with a product-led growth motion oftentimes hit a plateau point. So they would get really good at their inbound motion, but then at some point the market would get saturated and their growth would plateau. And then they'd be forced into a sales-led growth motion. And I think you can see that at like Slack and some of these other, Airtable is another great example. I think that 65% of the customers at Slack started as product-led until the sales team engaged them. That's an incredibly high percentage, but at some point that can potentially bonk. And I think Airtable, hero of product-led growth motions, had to shift to an enterprise motion. And it's kind of a notoriously common story of that shift. Zendesk did it. They started out PLG, then they were forced for growth purposes to go upmarket. I come from a background where I was at Anaplan, and we were incredibly, wildly big enterprise. I mean, like HP was one of our first customers, but then we were always noodling on the idea of how do you expand down market to get more market share. And so it's interesting because the consideration set on both is very, very different. And you're right. I think that product-led seems deceptively easy, and I don't think it is. And you're right. Outbound, in a weird way, while it's hard, is somewhat easier. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point, that CFOs are quote unquote running the show right now. I think that's pretty accurate to what we're seeing. I mean, even yesterday, you look at Snowflake's reports, and they crashed. And you dig into it, it's because budgets have tightened and their biggest customers simply aren't buying more, which says the CFO at the biggest company are saying, don't buy more. So that's a really, really interesting trend to navigate. I guess one question for you is, it seems like you don't want, if I were to take a step back from this, nobody should be putting their eggs all in one basket, in a sense. Do you think direct sales companies should be still considering a PLG motion, and then vice versa? Should they that still be on the table, or should they just focus on what they're doing?
Yeah, that's a great one. And one thing that you said that I don't hear a lot of people say is, you said you add product-led sales, or you add a product-led growth motions. And I don't hear a lot of that in board meetings or with go-to-market leaders, where I often see more of the swing of a pendulum, where they started PLG and they're like, we need to go enterprise, and let's forget about product-led growth and self-serve. We need to have an enterprise motion. Let's change the leadership, hire a go-to-market leader that's hardcore enterprise sales on that side, or the other way around, where people are very sales-led and they want to shift to PLG. The companies that are in hypergrowth and that are doing great are companies that stack multiple motions together. And the trend that I would say that I'm seeing with the customers and the companies we're working with is that stacking of motion is happening earlier and earlier. You mentioned Slack, Atlassian. I mean, it took them, they were at hundreds of millions in revenue before they started to add a motion to what they had. Now, I would say, if you have more than $10 million in ARR, you're probably already at that stage where you should start building multiple motions and running them together.
100% agree. Across our prospects and customers, that's what we're seeing, is companies as small as $20 million going, hey, I have a direct sales motion. I need in-app upsells. I need to be able to have that show up for my direct sales team. I need to actually do website commerce, PLG motion now. And it is a stacking as opposed to a switch. And I do think, I like to call it a hybrid sales motion, because you're not saying it's one or the other, it's both. And then they have to really work in concert. And that's actually pretty tricky to do. And that's where, that's what we love to talk about internally, because we say that we facilitate doing sales on your website, but we also facilitate your direct sales team having exposure and insight into what happens on your sales channel on the website and within your CRM so that you can do something hybrid. So yeah, go ahead.
No, and when I love that idea of stacking and the point you shared. I just had a conversation with a CRO yesterday, and I've heard this conversation like so many times. So maybe I did there. Having also multiple motions is quite critical, I think, in the world we live in. I've never been, I think, in a market with so much variance where you had like your outbound motion working, and suddenly 2 quarters later, nothing's working anymore. Or right, you had the product-led sales was working. Now it's getting more challenging. Like more players came into your space, or buyers' budget have changed. And then there's partner-led. So what I've heard like a few CIOs tell me is by having multiple motions stacked together, almost every year there is like 2 motions doing good, 1 motion that's dropping, and then the next year that's the other way around. So if you embrace the fact that we're in a world that you cannot predict, instead of trying very hard and make that 1 motion work, it's almost like a requirement to have a portfolio of motions, and that's your best insurance to hitting your numbers at the end of the year.
I feel like it's almost like a financial planner conversation. How are you diverse?
I know with your background with Anaplan, you're like, yes, I like portfolio hedging. Yeah.
Yeah. Like which one? Yeah. I mean, are you putting all, like it's a risk if you say, I'm going to put all my bets on this one channel. Yeah. The volatility of what we're seeing in terms of behavior is just increased. And it's just an interesting thing because I would say for the entirety of my career, it's like been 20 years of this same report, which is people don't want to talk to a salesperson anymore. It's like the most common thing. And that nobody's really realized that. And it's just, it's time. And it's like, you can just see this compression happening and because of the non-predictability of consumer behavior. So, I think that we're starting to see an emergence of what I call a B2N world. It's really not about B2B anymore. And it's not about B2C, and there's not a big chasm in between the two anymore. And so if you're developing and you want to be a modern SaaS company, you need to be focused on B2N as a motion and actually set up systems at the beginning that take into consideration that this may be part of your journey. Maybe it's not in year 1 through 3, but it might be in 3 to 6. And you have to kind of think ahead of the game and say, all bets are off on what the sales motion might be. For all I know, I might have a partner motion. Maybe I'll have a self-service motion. Maybe I'm going to take my self-service and go up market. And I think one of my favorite, it's atypical. It's the Eisenhower matrix. It's just like startups have a tendency to be like urgency of now, what's urgent in today versus long-term thinking. And it's always in like the right-hand quadrant of that matrix, which is like the long-term, but very important focus. And I would say optimizing for a hybrid sales motion is that long-term view, is making sure you keep it in mind as you're scaling, because there are definitive system impacts that will either completely hinder you from doing it when your board asks, or you can set up a structure that when your board asks, you're ready. And that's the thing that I'm oftentimes talking to companies about is, have you future-proofed yourself a bit for what your board's going to ask you for? So if the world is about diversity of motions, then, get ready, because you don't want to take a year or 2 to figure out how you're going to do that operationally. You want to be able to just turn it on. And that's our little speech to the market. But, well, let's dig into it then. So how do you transition from PLG only to hybrid? Like, what are some considerations there for you, or vice versa? Either way, we can start which one or the other is sales-led. SLG is the term I've been coining lately to PLG. So pick a lane. You tell me. Where do we want to start?
Let's go from PLG to adding PLS on top of it.
Okay. What are some considerations that you think of top of mind as you're doing that?
Yeah. I think in both situations, there is often a huge cultural change that I think needs to be understood. And if there is no alignment at the top, it's a mess in the organization. So often I see like PLG is a difficult motion because you need product, you need marketing, you need sales to be aligned. Like already sales and marketing being aligned is challenging. Now you have a trio. That's even harder to add like three organizations. When it comes to adding a product-led sales motion on top of PLG, there are like some critical questions that needs to be answered at the top. And I know you're an expert in pricing, so maybe I'll start there. There is often a huge question of how do we identify the customers that wants to have a self-serve versus customers that wants to have more of a sales motion. So there's already a question on the markets that you want to go after. Often, like people simplify that by saying, oh, simple, like, SMB, it's PL, self-serve, and enterprise, it's sales-led. I think it's a mistake, and we can go into that a bit deeper. But the other one is, on the pricing side, it's often a big challenge because when it's self-serve, you're going to have like an ACV or like a pricing plan that starts like at $10 a month per seat of offer, and then $100, $200. And then you have sellers where it doesn't make sense to have a sales team if you don't sell something at less than $3,000 a year, or the minimum. But often you want to be more around an ACV of 10K, 20K, 50K, 100K. So that creates a huge gap between what your prospects see on the website. They see something at $300 on your website, and then you talk to a salesperson who is asking for $30,000. How do you align on that and create something that makes sense for the buyer in the first place?
It's the pricing is critical, but before I jump in there, I want to talk to one thing that you just said that I think is so true. Is there's this thought that the product-led growth motion is for the low end.
Yep.
And it's such a misnomer, because when you talk to Zoom, for instance, and they were very good at this, what they realized early on was that executives at very large companies would self-service a personal account in the early days and actually be testing it out outside of like an RFP process. And actually those self-service customers were enterprise grade, but you had to go find them like a needle in a haystack to figure out who they were. And that is incredibly hard to do per your point, because there's some huge data silos where the pricing on the website is actually its own tech stack. And also the customer transaction and the customer accounts are its own transaction off the website. And they typically, what we've seen, and it's startling how bad it is in the industry, it completely bypasses your CRM. So all of your self-service transactions don't even live in the same database as your direct sales team. So that there's this like one customer, there's parallel universes of customer journeys with no integration between them whatsoever. So that customer on your website will just drop into a billing engine, and it's usually a pretty vanilla billing engine that does not have any capabilities to do complex pricing. And then on the sales-led motion, you'll get a lead, or they hit the contact sales button on the website where there's no pricing information, which isn't a great customer experience anyway. So you had like a good, better, best motion. So the good and the better had pricing you could self-service. And then there's this amorphous black hole of contact sales, and that drops into a totally different customer journey into CRM. So basically you have two data sets, two accounts, two pricing strategies that are running in parallel, when in fact, you should be envisioning the path between the self-service motion upgrading into the direct sales motion. But if that data is not in your CRM, how in the world does the rep know when to reach out to a customer to potentially suggest an upsell? If the transactional data of the revenue associated with the customer is not in Salesforce or your CRM, how in the world are they going to know that someone isn't even a good person to go after? And so what we see is this weird retrospective data warehousing of customer data that's not real time. And it's usually with your BI team, and it's not actually accessible to the people selling on the ground. And so that's where I think the biggest first thing for like transitioning to this stacked motion is, how in the world are you going to combine your pricing motions in a coherent way, and also visibility into your customer's journey in a coherent way? And that to date with traditional systems, because all of the systems I think were built for one or the other, because nobody thought to stack. They only thought to shift. And so I think that's the big transition I'm seeing is Other than new, in terms of companies, there's not a lot of options to technologically stack your pricing so that you have one unified pricing model. You just simply extend to different places and different channels, whether that's self-service, direct, or partner. So that's my long-winded, very excited geek answer on this, because I think about this all the time. But that's how we look at it from our perspective, is it's just, otherwise you're just, wow, you're throwing people in custom code at this to try to figure out something that sort of works.
That's fascinating. I think I come from a different angle and background, but it's fascinating to see exactly what you said around the stack that's been built has been built for a single motion. HubSpot and Madkudu, that's mostly for inbound, right? That's type of model. Then you have ABM solutions. They assume you only have an ABM, an ABM way to look at the world. And then on the product-led growth, most of the times going to be like product-led growth tools, owned by product, owned also by growth. But those three different stacks, they're not built for that hybrid motion. And that's interesting to hear what that means on the pricing side. And in my world, like in the world more of sales and growth, we're seeing something very similar where, for example, we talked about adding a PLS motion and not seeing the world into, okay, sales service for SMB and enterprise is ABM. One of the things, for example, that I always ask my customers, and surprisingly, like very, very few have the answer right away, is you have a target account list of like enterprise accounts you want to go after. What percentage of those accounts are already using your product, right? And is it like 1%, 5%, 10%, 20%, 50%, right? And that changes, I think, how you go to market a lot. And you literally had many situations. We actually did a benchmark. We looked at 100 of our customers, and we looked at the overlap between the target account list enterprise and product activities. And what we found is like, on average, 25% of the target account list is already a customer or is already using the product, right? But the sales team have no visibility into that. And literally, you have sellers that go after Walmart in an account, and then they don't realize that there are already like 12 people at that branch at Walmart that they're trying to sell to, leveraging the product today that they're selling. So it's pretty crazy to see how the stack is basically holding people back, both on the pricing side, but also on the market side, because it's what built for a world where there is just a single version.
Yeah. And that, what you just said, some of the biggest companies in the Valley have this problem, and it's shocking. Like almost all of them do, because they're trying to take single motion stacks and then find a way to piece them together, and they don't. And it's fascinating. I mean, funny enough, it's not just hybrid sales motions. It's also hybrid pricing strategies. I find a lot of billing or quoting engines are single use case. And they don't kind of realize that you probably will sell like usage consumption, recurring subscription, one time, and services together. They tend to think everything is very vanilla, one kind of station, sort of, I'm just going to sell this one thing. But that's not how the world works. And that's not what we're seeing. Everything's hybrid right now. And it's very flexible. And it's, hey, the customer wants to choose how they buy. And they also want a lot of variety of choosing what they buy in terms of the pricing strategy itself. So I would say hybrid is kind of the name of the game across both channel and pricing. And that's where tech is definitively falling down. Because it was built, a lot of these tech stacks were built 15 years ago, but just think about how much has changed in 15 years for SaaS. The pricing models, you didn't have usage or consumption pricing models, which aligns really beautifully to product-led growth motions. You had the notion of only PLG or only sales. Yeah. And so, it's this interesting thing is that I think the innovation of SaaS has actually outpaced the stack it had. So, and one of the things I would highlight on it is, I think you're right on it. It has to be executive top down on this to say, what, we're going to align the whole company around this stacked notion, because that's going to inform a lot of our choices about product, about marketing, about post-sales and customer success, because they kind of need a playbook each, however they come into, and then the playbooks have to actually connect. So you have a product-led growth motion company, that's got to then transition to the sales-led playbook. They're not two separate things. And it's so funny to me because I remember consulting for a portfolio company of the DC I was at. It was like, oh, we're just going to spin up a product-led growth motion. It's going to be great. And they were like an infrastructure, more database play. And they just didn't have the DNA to even know where to start on a product-led growth motion. It's so different because it's not outbound, it's inbound. And then suddenly the requirements around usability and user experience and how did you configure your product to actually like drop into it? Is it a good experience on a like immediate purchase basis? Can you easily set it up? It's just a totally different consideration set. And I think it's really interesting to say, okay, that means that you're going to have to make slightly different investments on the DNA of your team, even of who do you use. Like, I don't think straight B2B marketers are going to exist anymore. They're going to have to start pulling from a B2C war chest in terms of tactics, and the same for any other function. But so you say alignment on the execs, and then I'm talking team DNA and then systems. What about like just execution or just the process of stacking? Like, how should companies think about like where to start? And I don't want to make this sound daunting because I think it's an industry requirement. So you're going to have to probably do it one way or the other, have some flavor. But curious where you think companies should think to start or how they should approach it without, kind of bite size.
Yeah, and maybe I'll share a story. Like just 2 weeks ago, I brought together like about 10 CMOs and CROs, and it's part of our advisory council that we've put together. And we were discussing the change in GTMs. What are they experiencing right now? Where are they investing? What's working? What's not working? And one of the things that came out pretty strongly was the need to start with the customer. So we say, where do we start, right? And we don't start with emotions. And I feel like the focus and the obsession with emotion has been driven by vendors, where inbound HubSpot came in and they say, look, forget everything you learned. The only way to build a company is like to create great content, to earn the attention of your buyers, and you let them in, right? ABM came next and they say, no, all of that is wrong. You have the net and the spears. Like, when you do inbound, you're casting a huge net. You're basically spreading your efforts on way too big. You need to have a very small target account list and use a spear to go after them. Then PLG came. And then again, we have the radicals. Like we have radicals all the time that say, no, like the buyers want to experience the product before they buy. You need to let people self-serve. And nobody's listening to the customer in a very like sincere way, right? Yeah. So Tiffen, for example, like the CMO Amplitude is where she's starting, and all of our customers actually like merging and mixing those motions. She's really starting from the customer. Who are my customers and what are those customers wanting to experience? There is a segment of customers that want like a pure self-serve motion. They don't want to talk to sales and they want a digital experience. But they are a type of customers, and it doesn't mean the bigger customers. They actually want the assist of a salesperson, because what they're buying, they just don't want the product and figure everything out themselves. They say, no, I want to pick up the phone, talk to someone, tell me what I should be using, how to deploy it. I want to have a partner I can trust. You mentioned like pricing wise, it's not just like usage pricing, it's also like services. That's a very important element today. So I would say like when we put those plans together, instead of starting with a spreadsheet, which often CFOs love, right? You have dividend plan. Okay, how the boss will contribute to this inbound, and then PLG partner, and then you put like those numbers, for each month. Start first with like, what are the customers you have? What do they want? And then you build your plan against those customer segments.
I think that's so on point. Is, even in this conversation, I'm kind of catching us. We're sort of reinforcing the false dichotomy of sales-led versus product-led. And I would say it's more of it.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a spectrum. Yes, you want to stack them, but actually it's almost like how you could do sales assist with a light version of product led on it, so that you're helping do pricing calculations, or you give them pricing calculator or self-service like tools, but it's still sales led. Conversely, you can move that slider on the spectrum to being product led, but then there's some key moments of human intervention. And it starts to determine where you are in that spectrum. So if you think of product-led growth and sales-led growth as a spectrum, and you fit somewhere on the spectrum, you have to start with the customer. And I'm thinking about this story that I really love is the SVP of sales for Optimizely. I think he got recruited from Salesforce. And Optimizely's DNA was engineering and product first. And we're a self-service product. That's what we are. And he actually went in and looked at their customers and realized there was these very sizable upmarket accounts using Optimizely. And in fact, as a self-service product, it wasn't that intuitive to set up because it's pretty dynamic. It's a pretty complex product. It's very, very
powerful. Yeah.
Very powerful. And he's like, no, you're actually an enterprise grade sales motion. You're not PLG. You actually, on the spectrum, are much more towards the sales led than the PLG. That didn't change the fact that I think that they continued to have a spectrum of both. But I think he just took the slider and said, I'm looking at your customer base, and your customer base is telling me it's much more sales led. And that's how Optimizely became, I think, pretty wildly successful, is that they really listened and looked at the customers that were actually buying and tried to figure out that journey. And so I think reinforcing it, like, I always don't want to say stack. It's sort of like a flavoring. Like,
a blend.
Flavoring, spectrum, it's blended. And that's really going to be unique to your product experience and unique to your company. Like, people want formulas for everything. Like, should I start PLG or should I, like, you start with your customer and their behavior and their journey, and then that will tell you. And that's where, like, how we think about it is the key to our product is what we call the universal data model that we have that takes all of your customer attributes we can find and then all of their transactional attributes so that you can see that journey from the lead all the way to the opportunity to renewal to upsell to the entire close, financial close, and say, what is the customer's journey telling you about what's working? What's the bottom-up data saying about what your customer and how they like to buy? What are the experience you want to run? What A/B tests do you want to do on pricing? How do you want to flex that sales-led versus product-led motion on the spectrum? So you have to have the data to make those decisions. And I think that's probably why people think about it as either or. Kind of goes back to that data silo problem. They don't have enough data to say.
Yeah. It's very hard to operationalize those hybrid motions, or whatever we decide to call that.
Yeah, because they're siloed. So you're kind of flexing. But yeah, I think it's what's right for your go-to-market, what's right for your company, what's right for your industry. It's not, I would love to say that there was like a formula. I don't think there is exactly. Like, I think HubSpot's a great example of a sales assist self-service motion. I think they cracked the code on it. Very, very well. You still talk to a salesperson, but it feels like you did it yourself. And I don't know, I think I would love to challenge enterprise companies to see if they could go farther that direction on the big ticket cost items. Can you go that? Like, I think Snowflake and some of these data warehousing companies actually did that. I think that's part of their innovation, was they actually took what would have been a heavy, long sales motion and made it more accessible. But it also depends on who your buyer is. If you're selling to engineering, they do not want to talk to someone. Or someone else might. There's a ton of consideration sets. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on that of just like how you would think about navigating who is your customer and what do they actually want as well?
Yeah, I think we talked about silos in the data stack, and that's, you can see how the stacks are kind of forcing us to think one way or the other. I'm just coming back from B2BMX in Scottsdale, and there is one takeaway I got from the 2 or 3 days there is almost the end of inbound or outbound as two like opposite ways to go to market. So it's a very different world, right? But you always had you always had seen this challenge of what's inbound, what's outbound. So a lead comes in, like a demo request, you can say it's inbound, right? And when a seller would like send an email and get a meeting, that would be outbound. But the reality is, the email that you send to get that meeting from on the SDR side, you actually had a webinar before that, or they went to your website, click on an ad. So is that meeting really outbound? And the other way around, where often what you see is SDR reach out to someone, this person does not respond to email, but they sign up for a demo or they sign up for the product. So is that meeting or is that pipeline really inbound? And I think what I've heard a lot in the past few days is, how do we change our KPIs? How do we change the view of the customer? So at the end of the day, like the CRO or CFO doesn't care, right? Like who booked the last meeting, who was the last touch on the interaction. What they care about is, as an experience for the customers, what are the different touches and experience I need to provide to actually like generate more engagement and then revenue. So it would be interesting on the product side to think of it more in a holistic ways and change the KPIs that we have, so that it's not just after the data silos, making sure we align teams so they don't fight with each other. They actually fight to provide a better experience for the customers, and they actually fight the competition, not the other team inside the same company.
I think that's a huge part of it, is there has to be a cultural change within companies to say that we all collectively own this customer journey.
Yep.
So engineering might have a higher touch on the self-service PLG side, but you really have to care about your sales-led motion and your sales team. And those are wildly different personality types, and they typically don't necessarily see eye to eye. And then sales and finance have to be seeing eye to eye on, different things as well, and say, hey, I think traditionally what happened was it was a slow enough process, or the customer journey wasn't that diverse. So you could be like, hey, as a sales team, I'm going to pick my tool. And then Eng was like, I'm going to pick my tool. Customer success was like, I'm going to pick a tool over here. And marketing is like, I'm going to pick a tool over here. And then you were left with this, what I would call SaaS explosion of how in the world are you going to integrate all the data on this? And did these data models even match?
I call it the front-end stack.
Yeah. Do I have a coherent picture of my customer's journey? And the answer would be no. And I would say part of that was it was a simpler journey, but then also part of it is a psychological, cultural problem, which is everybody's like, it's my turf and I pick my own tooling. And I think that's the compression I'm seeing in the industry. And that's why I would say the role of RevOps is emerging is, what is the customer's revenue journey from end to end? And you can't chop it up or try to translate it between tools anymore if you have a hybrid sales motion and a hybrid pricing motion. Suddenly everyone has to literally get in a room, sing Kumbaya, and have a group hug to get aligned. Because if you don't, this poor customer is like this hot potato of being bounced around between very weird experiences, I think, on their sort of purchase to implementation to renewal process. Because nobody has a straightforward idea of what the other team did with them, which isn't going to work. And so I think that would be the consistent factor I see on companies that cracked the code on this one way or another. They were somehow able to align teams. And I think product-led growth teams tend to do this slightly better up front, but I see them really falling down, from a cultural standpoint, when they're asked to deal with a sales team. So
true. I think RevOps and finance have a unique position because they have that overall vision, right? Like they can have that full view. And maybe one thing I would add to what you said is there is a cultural change, and also especially with sales incentives. One of the CMO I met also yesterday was sharing in terms of KPIs and compensations. She also has compensation based on the result of the sales team. So it's not just pipeline. It's are we hitting our numbers? If the sales team is hitting numbers, they get a nice bonus. If not, they don't get that bonus. So I think making sure we align not on, hey, how many PQL are generated, MQLs, or sales or revenue. How do we align our teams by having compensation structure that incentivize people to work together? And I think CFO and RevOps can have a unique contribution to that.
I'm curious, how would you see that working in terms of compensation structure for product-led growth, if they inbound off the website versus a direct sales motion where, they prospected them in. Did they have any details on how that would look, or was it more of just sort of the generalized compensation structure across marketing sales?
Yeah, and on that one was pretty intense in some way, because you always want to have a compensation that you have a significant amount of control on, because if you incentivize on like company AR, I mean, there is so many teams working different ways on that. But on that one, it was really like, I don't care if it's inbound or outbound. I'm going to, for example, like have a compensation for the SDR team that's based on overall pipeline, whether or not it's self-serve, or if it's like purely like I sent an email, booked a meeting, and meeting held. So to be candid, I think it's still, people are still exploring there. I'm not saying like, hey, here's the playbook to run, but it's definitely a sign that RevOps and finance are seeing the pain that having those siloed compensation create, and the fact that it actually like results in a lower growth for the company. So how do we help people work together and incentivize them in the right way? So
Yeah.
to be continued.
Yeah. And I'm like taking all of this in and I'm thinking about like, I want to leave everyone with like some takeaways of like actionable next steps. So I'm going to summarize what I heard. I think it starts with leadership. Are you adjusting yourself on the spectrum of PLG to sales led? And are you aligned as a leadership function? I think you to fall over. If you're not aligned leadership wise on this,
Nothing will happen. No.
Nothing will happen. I think number two, per your point, is what is the actual customer's journey? I think there's a lot of people like, oh, this sounds like a really good idea because my board member told me, or this other company did it. But how are your actual customers behaving? And then I really love the idea of compensation. Now, are the underlays, are all the teams incentivized to make this work? Because I see a lot of wars between sales and engineering, or product-led versus sales-led. So is there a compensation structure that brings everyone psychologically together against that customer journey? And then I think, the undergirding of all of it is operationalizing it from a tech standpoint.
Exactly.
Is once you have those things in terms of what you want, what is the thing you want? How are you going to actually choose tech against that? So I think once you've aligned people and culture and customer, I think the tech flows out of that and makes it fairly obvious how you want to think about it. And then the final point I would probably add on is the urgency of now versus long-term thinking. And that's where I see a really big difference between that high growth early startup and then an enterprise grade person that's done operations long term, is they're thinking a little bit farther out and not just doing the urgent thing now. And that's where I think all of this is you have to future proof the plan. And that's back to that earlier part in the conversation, is because things are so unpredictable right now, you need to be able to pivot really quickly. And you need to find, I would say, I think that the tech choices that are going to win right now are the ones that have a Swiss Army knife capability of allowing you to do agile go-to-market pivots, whether that's pricing, channel, et cetera. So I think those are like, did I miss anything on that? But I think those are like kind of the 5-ish takeaways from what we just said.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I cannot agree more. Yeah.
Awesome. I think, Sam, based on this conversation, I could keep going for like another hour and we could start cracking the code on something else. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and so fun to hear your point of view on this world from sort of more the front end part. And we are more on that like operational, like transactional part. So super fun to chat.
Lovely conversation, Kate. Thank you.